are ready?
Yes, whenever you're ready.
Okay. 我宣布安全理事会
The
第9114次会议
9,114th
现在
meeting
开
of
始。
the Security Council is called to order.
本次会议的临时
The
议程
provisional
是
agenda for
对
this
国际
meeting
和平与
is
安全的威胁。
threats to international peace
议程
and
通过。
security. The agenda is adopted.
按照安理会暂行
In
议事规
accordance
则第
with
37条，
Rule
我邀请
37 of
乌
the
克兰代
Council's
表参加
provisional rules of
本次会议。
procedure,
就
I
这样
invite the representative of
决定。
Ukraine to participate in this meeting. It is so decided.
In 按照安理会暂行议
In
事规则第
accordance
39
with
条，
Rule
我邀请主
39
管
of the
政治和
Council's
建设
provisional rules
和
of
平事
Mr. President, the United Nations remains gravely concerned about the dangerous situation in and around the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant in southern Ukraine. The plant continues to be operated by Ukrainian technical personnel, but has been under the control of the military forces of the Russian Federation since early March. In early August, disturbing reports of an escalation of shelling around the plant began to emerge. The Secretary General has appealed to all concerned to exercise common sense and reason and to refrain from undertaking any actions that might endanger the physical integrity, safety, or security of the nuclear plant, Europe's largest. On 15 August, the Secretary General discussed the issue of the plant's safety during a call with Russian Minister of Defense Sergei Shoigu. On 18 August, during his visit to Lviv, he discussed the situation with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. In all his statements and meetings, the Secretary General has continued to call for all military activities in the immediate vicinity of the plant to cease immediately and for all sides to refrain from targeting its facilities or surroundings. All military personnel and equipment must be withdrawn from the plant. There should be no further deployment of forces or equipment to the site. The facility must not be used as part of any military operation, and an agreement on a safe parameter of demilitarization to ensure the safety of the area should be reached. Regrettably, despite numerous calls and appeals, instead of de-escalation, we continue to see the almost daily reports of alarming incidents involving the plant. Today, the Director General of the IAEA renewed his request to send an IAEA mission to carry out essential safety, security, and safeguard activities at the site. Preparations for the mission are proceeding, and the IAEA is in active consultations with all parties regarding its efforts to send such a mission as soon as possible. We welcome Ukraine and Russia's recent statements indicating support for the IAEA's aim to send a mission to the plant, which would be IAEA's first to that site since the start of the war. Mr. President, common sense must prevail to avoid any actions that might endanger the physical integrity, safety, or security of the plant. As the Secretary General stressed in his briefing at the Council yesterday, the commitment to dialogue and results must be applied to the critical situation at the plant. If such incidents continue to escalate, we could face a disaster. The United Nations continues to fully support the critical work of the International Atomic Energy Agency and its efforts to ensure the safe operation of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant and other nuclear facilities in Ukraine. In close contact with the IAEA, the UN has assessed that we have the logistics and security capacity in Ukraine to support any IAEA mission to the plant from Kyiv, provided Ukraine and Russia agree. We once again urge the parties to provide the IAEA mission with immediate, secure, and unfettered access to the site. Agreement is urgently needed to reestablish Zaporizhzhia as purely civilian infrastructure and to ensure the safety of the area. We must be clear that any potential damage to the plant or any other nuclear facilities in Ukraine leading to a possible nuclear incident would have catastrophic consequences not only for the immediate vicinity, but for the region and beyond. Similarly, any damage leading to the plant being cut from the Ukrainian power grid would have catastrophic humanitarian implications, particularly with winter approaching. As the Secretary General has made clear, the electricity produced at the Zaporizhzhia plant belongs to Ukraine. At this moment, it is imperative that we receive the express commitment of the parties to stop any military activities around the plant and to enable its continued safe and secure operations. To paraphrase the Secretary General's blunt warning, any potential damage to Zaporizhzhia is suicidal. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank Ms. DiCarlo for her briefing. I now give the floor to the members of the Security Council. I give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Mr. President, thank the Under-Secretary General Rosemary DiCarlo for her briefing. I would like to, in the context of this briefing, point out that we heard her words when she said that the electricity of the Zaporizhzhia NPP belongs to Ukraine. But I would like to draw your attention to the fact that we didn't hear similar words from the Secretariat about the frozen Russian financial assets that are frozen in the West or the Syrian oil that are being held by the American authorities who are illegally occupying Syria. We've never heard that. Since the last meeting of the Security Council on the Zaporizhzhia NPP, about 2 weeks have passed, and in the course of that time, the nuclear safety situation has further deteriorated. The armed forces of Ukraine continue basically every day to shell the territory of the NPP and the town of Energodar, and this creates a real risk of a radiation accident at the Zaporizhzhia NPP with catastrophic consequences for the entire European continent. According to the information that the Ministry of Defense of Russia has and the administration of the Zaporizhzhia Oblast, on the 11th of August, the 44th Artillery Brigade of the Ukrainian Armed Force shelled the station using 152mm shells. As a result of that, the equipment of spray ponds within the nuclear reactor's cooling system was damaged. On the 14th of August, the armed forces of Ukraine had 10 shellings of the NPP using 150mm shells for M77 howitzers, which are American-made, and 2 guided munitions were launched. As a result of that, 1 person died in Energodar, 1 further person was wounded. On the 15th of August, 30 shells were launched for 152mm artillery facilities. On the 17th, 11 shells and also kamikaze unmanned aerial vehicle was launched, which is Polish-made. 3 strikes were made by loitering munitions on Energodar. On the 18th of August, in Energodar, there were 7 shellings using heavy artillery. On the 20th of August, from the Ukrainian forces' positions, once again there was shelling against the NPP using heavy artillery and American-made shells for 155mm caliber using M379 artillery fuse, which is American-made. There was an artillery strike against the specialized ancillary buildings 1 and 2 and the lab and amenities building. As a result, the lab and amenities buildings number 2 was damaged, the hydraulics unit building was damaged, and lighting of the station was damaged. Immediately after the shelling, fire was opened against the suburbs of Energodar. On the 22nd of August, an UAV struck the lab and amenities building number 2. Furthermore, the American long-range artillery was used to shell the thermal power station in Energodar. And according to our information, one civilian died and one was wounded. I just wanted to show you now a photo of the destruction on the territory of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant as a result of shellings by the Ukrainian armed forces. We have a whole slew of such photographic evidence, and we disseminated it this morning as an official document within the Security Council and the GA. The fact that the Kiev regime continues with attacks on the station is a direct consequence of criminal acquiescence on the part of its Western patrons. At the last meeting, not a single Western delegation had the courage to condemn the shelling of the station by the Ukrainian armed forces and ask the Kievan regime to stop it. Nor was the courage found in European capitals. The capitals are simply launching an appeal to Russia to stop the so-called recent activity surrounding the Zaporizhzhia NPP. We are under the impression that our colleagues exist in their own parallel reality in which the Russian military are themselves shelling the station that they are protecting and are using the American systems for that. The pinnacle of this absurd was a recent statement made by the UK MP Tobias Ellwood and member of the House of Representatives of the United States, Adam Kinzinger, when they said that the shellings of the NPP could be the reason for invoking Article 5 of NATO. At the same time, the Western mass media are using the conclusions of the U.S. Arms Control Disarmament Agency, which says that there is nothing dangerous for the people in Western Europe in the shelling of the NPP or even in a possible accident. There will be no major disaster. The station should withstand the rocket strike, and even if it doesn't, then the tongue of radioactive contamination will not reach Western Europe. The fact that even in this scenario, at the very least, the people in the Zaporizhzhia Oblast will suffer, well, our Western colleagues, I think, traditionally chalk off to collateral damage. Well, probably this is how they express their concern about people and the human-centered security that we heard so much about during yesterday's meeting of the Council. This cynical attitude towards the people of Ukraine is one other evidence of the fact that the Western handlers of Kiev are not at all worried about that, and they stand ready to fight until the very last Ukrainian. The disaster as a result of the shelling of the NPP, so far we have been able to avoid only because there is smooth joint work between the workers of the station, fire squads, emergency people, and the Russian military, who are helping them every way they can. And this shows that there is a healthy working atmosphere at the station and no one is oppressing anyone there. Despite the false statements made by the Kiev regime and its handlers, Russia is not locating heavy weaponry at the Zaporizhzhia NPP and is not using the station for military purpose. The Military of Defense stand ready to provide IAEA with high-resolution photos which shows that the weaponry, all the less so heavy weaponry, is not located on the territory of the station. Mr. President, recently Ukraine had the visit of the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, and we pinned certain hopes on his trip. We expected the UN finally will demand that Kiev stop shelling the station. But we didn't hear from the Secretary words of condemnation of what's going on, other than appeals to, I quote, that military activities should avoid the Zaporizhzhia NPP. I would like to ask Ms. DiCarlo whether the Secretary General managed to obtain from Vladimir Zelensky a promise to stop shelling the station. What is the assessment of the Secretariat of the UN that the shelling of the station by Ukraine continue in the light of the fact that IAEA is seriously concerned by the situation? From day one, we have supported IAEA efforts and its Director General Rafael Grossi to organize a mission to the Zaporizhzhia NPP, and we did everything we could to make sure that the experts visit, the agency visit, took place already in June. And we agreed to the mission already by the 3rd of June. At the time, the trip did not happen through no fault of our own. Today, we hear absurd statements in foreign mass media that the foreign countries basically pushed Russia to agree to the mission. We expect that the IAEA mission will take place in the very near future, and the agency experts will confirm the real situation at the station. We stand ready to extend maximal support possible to resolve all organizational issues. Mr. President, I would like to now, in conclusion, draw attention of the members of the Council to the tragedy in Moscow on the 20th of August. An explosion of a car took place. Inside the car was the military correspondent and politologist Daria Dugina. Our competent authorities are investigating this, and preliminary conclusions are that this monstrous crime was organized by the Ukrainian Special Services. It was determined who the person doing that was, and she is connected to the Azov battalion. She managed to escape to Estonia. Daria Dugina was 29. Her life was stopped at its very height. Because of his professional activity, she has been for a long time followed by Ukrainian nationals. This is her photo on the Mirotvorets site, the infamous one that we mentioned several times, and they are boasting about her murder. As you can see, her photo is crossed, and the caption here is eliminated. We note that this crime was condemned by an official representative of the U.S. Department of State. We call on the Council and the UN leadership to condemn yet another crime by the Kiev regime. Not only are they using nuclear blackmail by shelling the NPP and holding people in Europe hostage, but they also crossed all of the lines and now physically eliminating those civilians they do not like. And in this case, we have a victim who was an independent journalist. She was killed because of her professional activity. The official representatives of the Kiev regime are openly calling for the murder of Russians. The Ukraine ambassador in Kazakhstan, Mr. Vrublevsky, stated publicly recently that the goal of Ukraine is to kill as many Russians as possible. The greater number of them are killed now, the fewer Russians other generations of the Ukrainians would have to kill. We are outraged by the fact that the Western countries not only do not condemn this, but they help Ukrainian special services to prepare saboteurs to eliminate the so-called undesirable ones. Very good example, the situation with the Ukrainian citizen, Mr. Karpenko, who was recruited by Ukrainian services in Czechia and was being prepared trained to mine and explode things in a Czech city of Český Krumlov. He was taught how to lay explosive in buildings and cars. After that, he was sent to the Donetsk People's Republic to conduct acts of terror in the building of the administration of the Volodyansk region. Fortunately, Karpenko turned himself in. But if he had done what he was trained for, the scale of victims is frightening to imagine. In this context, we are not surprised that the authorities of Czechia are openly expressing their happiness that Daria Dugina died. The Minister of Defense of Czechia, Jana Černochová, stated that she has no pity for Daria or her father, and that, I quote, that the night of the 21st August in Russia is something that Russia will remember for a long time. And then subsequently confirmed that she stands by every single word of hers. Even if we set aside the morals that has been in our Western colleagues replaced by the Russophobia, this statement of Mr. Chernohova is an open support and propaganda of acts of terror against civilians. I would like to recall that Mr. Chermak, a Czech citizen who openly supported an act of terror in Christchurch, was sentenced to 6 years in Czechia. And we expect that the competent authorities of Czechia will be equally serious about the statement made by the Ministry of Defense of their country and will assess them accordingly. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for his statement, and then now give the floor to the representative of Gabon.
I thank you, Mr. President. I thank Under Secretary General Rosemary DiCarlo for her insightful briefing. In recent weeks, information on the risk of a nuclear accident in Ukraine has become more insistent. The intensification of military activity in the vicinity of Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant and the allegation of the use of this nuclear power plant for military purposes raise the specter of a nuclear disaster with potential incalculable consequences. A couple of weeks ago, we gathered in this room to express our collective indignation at the likelihood that such an outcome could happen. All military activity at nuclear sites must cease. Parties to the conflict must refrain from any attacks, including cyber attacks on nuclear sites, and from any rhetoric that tends to use nuclear risk as a weapon of war. We call for independent and impartial investigation to establish responsibility for the attacks and other bombing targeting the Zaporizhzhia power plant. In the meantime, it is crucial that the belligerents respect the nuclear security rules in force and cooperate with IAEA with a view to securing the sites. We welcome the intention expressed by the parties to facilitate the conduct of an IAEA expert mission, and we urge them to find a common ground on the operational modalities of this mission, which we all call for Ukraine as soon as possible. It is not acceptable to wait and speculate on the potential risk of adding devastating environmental and human health effects to the economic and humanitarian impacts. After 6 months of war, suffering, and destruction, we think it's time to bring back peace to the heart of our priority agenda. My country encourages all initiatives aimed at bringing the parties to the negotiating table for peaceful coexistence. As long as the fighting continues, the situation in Ukraine will surely continue to worsen. The surest way to ward off multifaceted security threat is to end hostilities. We encourage all political and diplomatic effort to stop escalation, to silence the guns, and reach an agreement for a lasting peace between the parties. The grain agreement recently concluded is a source of hope on the possibility of convening a ceasefire agreement to pave the way for good faith negotiation for a return to sustainable peace. My country supports all international and regional efforts aiming at restoring peace in Ukraine. I thank you very much.
I thank the representative of Gabon for his statement. And now I give the floor to the representative of the United Arab Emirates.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to thank also Ms. DiCarlo for her timely briefing. Since our last meeting on August 11th, the situation around the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant continues to be deeply alarming. Despite urgent calls for de-escalation, we have continued to receive news of shelling in the proximity of the power plant. We underline once more that shelling around nuclear facility puts Ukraine, the wider region, and the whole world at a grave risk of a catastrophic nuclear accident. The example of Chernobyl has been frequently invoked in this chamber and elsewhere, and with reason. We remember all too well the horrendous consequences. The world cannot afford a scenario where another such calamity is even a possibility. When it comes to nuclear matters, our collective security is truly intertwined. It is a message that has been reinforced these last weeks during the 10th Review Conference of the Parties of the NPT here in New York. Nuclear safety is a critical issue for the United Arab Emirates and is a matter of priority. We remain committed to supporting all efforts ensuring the safety and security of nuclear facilities globally, including through our work with the IAEA and through our participation at the IAEA's Board of Governors. In this regard, we underline once again that the importance of refraining from any action that could further endanger the facility, particularly considering the volatile and fraught situation. And we echo the IAEA's Director General Grossi's recent statement calling for the urgent need to lower tensions near the plant. We further stress again that particular protection accorded to nuclear plants under international law. United Arab Emirates also reiterates the importance of the IAEA, that the IAEA has full unimpeded access to the site in order to assess the damage and ascertain the safety of the facility. We welcome that both parties support such a mission, and we urge that it can be conducted in an expeditious manner. Mr. President, we are a day away from marking 6 months since the beginning of the conflict. It remains crucial to advocate for constructive dialogue that will bring the conflict to a peaceful, sustainable resolution in a way that is consistent with the UN Charter and international law. The only way to truly stop the suffering brought by this conflict and to stem its consequences, including the risk of a catastrophic nuclear accident, is through achieving a cessation of hostilities throughout Ukraine. We, the members of this Council, must work towards fulfilling its mandate and take incremental and programmatic steps to support efforts toward diplomatic end to the conflict. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the UAE for his statement. And now I give the floor to the representative of Norway.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, USG DiCarlo, for your timely briefing. Russia's ongoing war of aggression against Ukraine has endangered nuclear safety and security in Ukraine, in the Russian Federation, in Europe, and beyond. And we reject the Russian Federation's use of the Security Council as a platform for disinformation. There is no doubt that the safety and security in and around the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant has deteriorated because of the presence of an armed aggressor. Russia's continued illegal war has increased the risk of a nuclear accident with potentially catastrophic consequences for human health and the environment. The Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency has outlined 7 indispensable pillars for nuclear safety and security, which we fully endorse. We note with great distress that virtually all seem to have been violated as a consequence of Russian aggression. We call for maximum military restraint in the area of Ukraine's Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. And we emphasize the importance of facilitating a mission from the IAEA to carry out essential safety, security, and safeguards activities while fully respecting Ukrainian sovereignty. In this regard, we note recent statements indicating that both Ukraine and Russia could support the IAEA aim to send a mission to Zaporizhzhia. Mr. President, we remain concerned that Russia's seizure of a nuclear power plant in Ukraine is also a means of taking hostage a central source of electricity supply essential to the civilian population of Ukraine. We call on Russia to return full control of the plant to its Ukrainian operator. And we commend Ukraine for its commitment and dedication to ensuring continuous nuclear safety and security under severe circumstances. Mr. President, Russia's illegal war and unprovoked aggression has caused terrible suffering for the people of Ukraine and beyond, including aggravating global food insecurity. Let me end by again reiterating that the Russian Federation must immediately withdraw its forces from Ukraine and its internationally recognized borders and cease all threats and military actions. This would also restore Ukraine's ability to ensure safe and secure operations of all of its nuclear facilities. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Norway for his statement. Now I would like to give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you for your briefing, Under Secretary General DiCarlo. We commend the Secretary General for his recent visit to Ukraine, and we greatly appreciate the UN's continued efforts to address the increasingly dangerous situation at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Colleagues, the issue at hand today is not some abstract political debate, and this is not some far-off problem. As we speak, Ukraine, neighboring states, the entire international community are living under the threat of a nuclear catastrophe. And people are, understandably, terrified. People like Tamara Karolkova, a 70-year-old grandmother who can see the plant from her apartment building. She has nightmares about the plant blowing up. As she told a reporter for National Public Radio, all of us are just scared all the time. And for what? Why on earth is a nuclear facility being used as a staging ground for war by Russian forces? These questions can only be answered by President Putin and could have been answered by members of the Russian delegation who sit here today. Only they can explain why Russia thinks it can redraw international borders by force in contravention of the UN Charter. Only they can account for the atrocities they have carried out against the Ukrainian people, bombings of schools and hospitals, the killing of aid workers and journalists, execution-style murders, and the forced deportations of Ukrainian civilians through so-called filtration operations. And only they can explain where their troops recklessly attacked and seized control of this plant, pushing us to the brink of nuclear disaster. I will recall again Ukraine's impeccable record of nuclear energy safety and security prior to Russia's seizure of this facility. But we didn't hear answers from the Russian delegation. What we heard were references to a hodgepodge of websites and tweets. And of course, that's a double-edged sword. As I would remind the Russian delegation, it was the Russian ambassador in Vienna who just a few days ago tweeted, "No mercy for the Ukrainian people." Nevertheless, a nuclear disaster at the plant is avoidable. Russia created this risk, and only Russia can defuse it. The solution is not complicated. Russia must end its unprovoked, unjustified war and withdraw its troops. And given the urgency of this situation, Russia must immediately follow the recommendation of Secretary General Guterres and establish a demilitarized zone in the area surrounding the plant. This would allow for the Ukrainian personnel, who are currently being held under duress, to operate the facility, complete a damage assessment, and restore the facility's impeccable safety, security, and safeguards performance. And a demilitarized zone would enable the IAEA team to travel to the facility, conduct an inspection, and assess the safety, security, and application of safeguards to ongoing nuclear plant operations. We also call on Russia to agree to an IAEA visit to the facility in a way that will respect Ukrainian sovereignty. And we echo the words of the Secretary General, that the electricity from Zaporizhzhia is Ukrainian electricity, and that this principle must be fully respected. Finally, let me close by reminding my Russian colleagues that as we approach Ukraine's Independence Day, the world is watching. This should not need saying, but please do not bomb schools, hospitals, orphanages, or homes. We will continue to pursue accountability for any and all violations of international law. And today, on the eve of the 6-month anniversary of Russia's invasion, we reiterate the message that we have shared with the Russian delegation throughout their war of choice. In the suffering, in the bloodshed, in this war. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the United States for his statement. Now I give the floor to the representative of Ireland.
Thank you, President, and I'd like to thank you, SG DiCarlo, for your briefing. President, Ireland continues to be deeply concerned by the situation at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant and the serious risk of a radiological accident or incident arising from military activity at that site. We are also very concerned by the ongoing shelling at and around the power plant, which must stop immediately. The devastating consequences for the people of Ukraine and the wider region of an accident or incident at Zaporizhzhia should be the overriding concern for all of us. We strongly support the Secretary-General's call for the demilitarization of the plant and its environs. President, it is essential that basic principles of nuclear safety and security are fully respected. We call on Russia, and indeed all states, to commit themselves to the 7 pillars of nuclear safety and security as set out by the IAEA Director General regarding peaceful nuclear facilities and materials in all circumstances, including in situations of armed conflict. We commend the bravery and professionalism of the Ukrainian personnel at the plant who have sought to maintain its safe operation despite being subjected to intolerable circumstances by Russian military forces. We strongly support an IAEA mission to the power plant to address safety, security and safeguards at the plant, respecting Ukraine's sovereignty over its full territory and infrastructure. We welcome Secretary-General Guterres' reaffirmation and as expressed by USG DiCarlo that the UN has the logistical and security capacity to support the mission from Kyiv to the nuclear power plant. It is vital that this mission can have full access with no restrictions. We hope to see that mission take place as soon as possible. We are also deeply worried by possible efforts to disconnect the power plant from the Ukrainian electrical grid. In the circumstances, this presents significant dangers for nuclear safety, as well as for the humanitarian needs of the people of Ukraine who are relying on it for their energy needs. President, let's call a spade a spade. The issues at Zaporizhzhia arise solely from Russia's illegal war against Ukraine. The Russian military have created this crisis through their illegal seizure and occupation of the Zaporizhzhia facility and their reckless actions in Ukraine, which have clearly demonstrated their utter disregard for nuclear safety and security. We recall that armed attacks against nuclear facilities devoted to peaceful purposes are violations of international law, including the principles of the UN Charter. President, as we have said before, if Russia is genuine in its concern regarding nuclear safety at Zaporizhzhia, it must assume its responsibilities and end its illegal occupation of the site, withdrawing its troops and munitions. This would see control of the plant restored to the competent Ukrainian authorities, supported by the IAEA. Ireland again calls on Russia to end its brutal war against the Ukrainian people and withdraw its troops from the entire internationally recognized territory of Ukraine, and to respect the sovereignty and territorial integrity of its neighbours. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Ireland for her statement. Now I give the floor to the representative of Ghana.
Thank you, Mr. President. At the outset, I would like to thank USG Rosemary DiCarlo for the updates on the rising international safety concerns on the state of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant in Ukraine. When this council met on the same subject a little over a week ago, the IAEA, through its Director General, warned of potentially tragic consequences for human lives and the environment in the event of the accidental leakage of radioactive material from the nuclear facility. Ghana regrets that despite the warnings and spirited appeals from the international community for all military action around the facility to cease, the indiscriminate shelling, attacks, and militarization of the nuclear facility and its vicinity has continued. We are constrained to repeat once again our grave alarm and condemnation of these unacceptable developments. We wish to remind the armed parties that the international law, including the 1977 amendment to the Geneva Convention, prohibits the conduct of military conflicts around nuclear sites. We also call for the immediate and full respect for the Convention on the Physical Protection of Nuclear Material and its 2005 amendment by all the armed parties. We call for the demilitarization of all the zones around Ukraine's nuclear facilities. In this respect, Ghana fully supports an independent assessment of the nuclear safety standards and safeguards at the Zaporizhzhia facility to assure that no breach has occurred. For this to happen, however, it is crucial for the Russian Federation, which exercises control of the facility, to grant immediate access to the IAEA in order for the agency to conduct the requisite assessment. We also stress the urgency for the IAEA authorities to act quickly to assess the danger and respond appropriately. Mr. President, Ghana continues to hold the principal position that there is no military solution to the ongoing military hostilities. We therefore urge the intensification of diplomacy and dialogue to comprehensively address the underlying security concerns and mistrust between the warring parties. Furthermore, while the pursuit of diplomacy and dialogue is prioritized, we also strongly believe that in parallel, an unconditional withdrawal of the invading troops of Russian Federation from the internationally recognized borders of Ukraine is a condition precedent for the restoration of the peace and security of Ukraine. In conclusion, we reiterate our previous calls that the plight of the civilians, particularly women and children, and the growing humanitarian threat should override all other considerations as we seek to stop this needless war. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Ghana for her statement. Now I give the floor to the representative of India.
Mr. President, let me begin by thanking Under-Secretary General Rosemary DiCarlo for the update, focusing on the safety and security of nuclear facilities in Ukraine. We continue to carefully follow developments regarding the safety and security of Ukraine's nuclear facilities. India attaches high importance to ensuring the safety and security of these facilities, as any accident involving nuclear facilities could potentially have disastrous consequences for public health and the environment. We also accord high priority to the discharge by the IAEA of its safeguards and monitoring activities in accordance with its statute in an effective, objective, and efficient manner, and we value the efforts of the agency in this regard. India remains concerned over the situation at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. We support the ongoing efforts, including that of the IAEA, to reduce tensions and steps to ensure nuclear safety and security at the facility. We've noted the latest information available with regard to nuclear power plants and facilities in Ukraine, including the updates published on 19 August by the IAEA. We hope that the proposed visit by a team from the agency to the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant and its surrounding areas will be agreed to by the two sides, as indicated in their recent statements. We continue to reiterate that the global order be anchored on international law, the UN Charter, and respect for the territorial integrity and sovereignty of states. Thank you.
I thank the representative of India for her statement. Now I would like to give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you to Under-Secretary General DiCarlo for this briefing. The United Kingdom remains gravely concerned about the implications for nuclear safety, security, and safeguards of Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine. Russia's invasion has disrupted the operation of nuclear facilities across Ukraine, posed a grave threat to operational safety, and prevented Ukrainian authorities from carrying out routine safeguarding tasks. Instead of calling yet another meeting on the crisis at Zaporizhzhia, Russia could resolve it immediately by withdrawing its forces from the plant and all of Ukraine and ceasing its senseless aggression. As well as causing untold suffering to the Ukrainian people, the simple fact is that Russia's invasion and its efforts to seize by force Ukraine's nuclear plants has jeopardized the safety of millions in the region who would be affected by a nuclear incident in Ukraine. Meanwhile, important nuclear safety and safeguards activities at the site are needed more than ever. We welcome progress towards an IAEA technical visit. Any visit should take place in a manner that respects Ukraine's sovereignty over its territory. The Secretary General has been clear that the UN can facilitate a visit from the Ukrainian side, and we welcome his and the UN's engagement. We also welcome the efforts of the Ukrainian administration and of IAEA staff to plan and support a mission, and we call upon Russia to provide appropriate security guarantees. We commend the heroic efforts of Ukrainian staff operating the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant despite the great pressure they are under. They must be allowed to carry out their duties without threats or further disruption. Cutting off a major supply of electricity to the people of Ukraine would further cause immense suffering, as USG DiCarlo said today. The electricity at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant belongs to Ukraine. Russia's war is reckless and irresponsible. A nuclear disaster should be unthinkable. No member of the United Nations, let alone a permanent member of this council, should bring about that threat by seeking to take another country's nuclear facilities by force. Russia's actions are contrary to the principles of the Convention of Nuclear Safety and other international nuclear safety conventions. So we call once more upon Russia to return full control of all Ukraine's nuclear facilities to their rightful sovereign owner to ensure their safe and secure operation. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the UK for his statement. Now I give the floor to the representative of Mexico.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Mr. President, we would like to thank the Undersecretary General DiCarlo for her presentation on the critical situation in the Zaporizhzhia plant. As was pointed out by the Secretary General, avoiding any action that endangers the integrity and security of the nuclear power plant, the largest in Europe, is a matter of common sense. But common sense is very often the least common of all senses. And the Secretary General stated also at the opening of the 10th Review Conference of the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, the NPT, that the world has managed to avoid the use of nuclear weapons simply out of luck. But luck is not a strategy, stressed the Secretary General. The attacks against the plant endanger security and could have catastrophic humanitarian consequences in the short, medium, and long term for the civilian population, including far beyond Ukraine and far beyond its neighbors. We also agree with the Secretary General that damaging the nuclear plant is the equivalent of a collective suicide. I would like to highlight 3 points. First of all of the attacks against the plant and its environs must cease immediately. Any attack against civilian nuclear facilities is a violation, flagrant violation of international law and of the statute of the IAEA. We reiterate what was said on the 11th of August. These attacks violate international humanitarian law, including the Geneva Conventions of 1949 and its additional protocol 1 of 1977. Secondly, the plant's facilities cannot be used under any circumstances to carry out military operations. The Zaporizhzhia plant must be kept outside of this conflict. It's a matter of priority to respect the civilian status of the plant and to reiterate to withdraw immediately all military and equipment and personnel. The Ukrainian regulatory authority must have the freedom of access and effective control over the operation of the plant so that we can respect the 7 crucial pillars of nuclear security. 3, we support the request of the Secretary General to establish a demilitarized zone which would allow the IAEA to carry out the necessary inspections in order to have objective, truthful, and impartial information on the conditions which exist in the plant. The IAEA today once again reiterated its request to carry out a technical inspection. The United Nations has also stated that it has the logistical and security capabilities to support any mission of the IAEA to Zaporizhzhia from Kyiv. as long as Ukraine and Russia reach an agreement. It's crucial to allow the inspection without any obstacles or pretexts. I'd like to conclude by reiterating Mexico's appeal to put an end to the war in Ukraine and to resume the path to dialogue. The conflict of the recent months has had an enormous cost for the civilian population, with irreversible consequences. And so we cannot wait any longer to establish a ceasefire. The negotiation of the grain agreements is credible proof of what can be achieved when there is political will and when reason prevails. We hope that this can happen once again when it comes to reaching an agreement over Zaporizhzhia, where what is at stake is no more, no less, the right to life. Thank you very much.
I thank the representative of Mexico for his statement. Now I give the floor to the representative of France.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and I thank Mrs. DiCarlo for her presentation. Mr. President, as we've said since the beginning of the war, France is deeply concerned by the threat presented by the Russian attack in Ukraine over the safety and security of Ukrainian nuclear facilities. The Zaporizhzhia plant in Ukrainian territory was forcibly seized by Russia. The presence and the actions of the Russian armed forces in the vicinity greatly increased the risk of an accident, and Russia bears responsibility for this situation. France would like to insist on three simple messages. First of all, Russia must return to Ukraine total control of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, as well as all of the nuclear facilities in Ukraine. All of the Russian military equipment and personnel must be withdrawn immediately from the power plant. The Ukrainian staff, which is operating the power plant, must be able to continue its mission without threat or pressure. Secondly, France welcomes and supports the efforts made by the Director General of the IAEA. The 7 pillars of nuclear safety and security, as defined by the Director of the IAEA, must be respected. The ability of the IAEA to monitor peaceful nuclear activities in all of Ukraine to ensure the respect of safeguards, a capacity which has been undermined by the actions of Russia, this must also be restored. Thirdly, it's important to facilitate as quickly as possible an expert mission of the IAEA to the Zaporizhzhia plant. This mission must take place in full respect of the sovereignty of Ukraine over its territory and over all of its infrastructure. France welcomes the role of the United Nations in this regard, as well as its readiness to ensure the necessary logistical support for the deployment of such a mission from Kyiv. It also welcomes the agreement in principle given by Ukraine and Russia to the holding of this mission, confirmed at the highest level. And now we need sufficient security guarantees, as well as a commitment from all the parties, so that the mission can take place in the coming days. France will continue to support at the highest level the efforts of the IAEA to this end, as was done by the President of the French Republic with President Putin on the 19th of August, and as he also did with President Zelensky on the 16th of August, and as was done this morning by the Minister for Europe and Foreign Affairs, Madame Colonna, during a phone conversation that she had with Sergei Lavrov. Thank you very much.
I thank the representative of France for her statement. Now I give the floor to the representative of Kenya.
Thank you, Mr. President. I thank USG Rosemary DiCarlo for her briefing on the situation concerning the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. It is unfortunate that we are having this discussion for the second time in just over a week, at the tail end of the 10th Review Conference of the Parties to the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons. The objective of this treaty is to prevent the spread of nuclear weapons and weapons technology, promote cooperation in the peaceful uses of nuclear energy, and further the goal of achieving nuclear disarmament and general and complete disarmament. Mr. President, the deployment of these weapons can have a long-term apocalyptic effect on humanity, biodiversity, and the environment. Indeed, a stray or deliberate targeting of any nuclear installation, even those intended for peaceful purposes, will turn them into nuclear weapons with equally devastating capabilities. We therefore remain deeply concerned that shelling continues around the environs of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, which is exposing thousands of civilians to grave security risks, as well as power cutoffs. In this regard, Kenya welcomes the recent visit to Lviv by the Secretary General and fully supports his plea for the withdrawal of military equipment and personnel, as well as an immediate end to all military activity around what is in fact Europe's largest nuclear power plant to guarantee its safety. We also urge the immediate and unconditional access to the site for experts and officials from the IAEA to conduct the critically needed safety, security, and safeguards verification activities. We welcome the expression of cooperation by the parties in this regard. Mr. President, Kenya continues to call for restraint from any actions that may further escalate the situation. We continue to reiterate, as we have stated time and time again, the need to shift gears to an immediate cessation of hostilities and the deployment of available diplomatic tools to end the conflict. Such a cessation should set the foundation for the negotiation of a lasting peace settlement that guarantees the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine, which Kenya continues to reaffirm. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Kenya for her statement. I'll give the floor to the representative of Brazil.
Thank you, Mr. President. I thank USG Rosemary DiCarlo for her briefing. 2 weeks ago, we met in this very chamber to discuss this very topic. We all expressed our concerns with the potentially catastrophic and lasting consequences for human health and the environment that substantial damage to the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant would entail. We reaffirmed that any armed attack on and threat against nuclear facilities devoted to peaceful purposes constitutes a violation of the principles of the UN Charter, international law, and the statute of the agency, as unanimously recognized by the International Atomic Agency General Conference. We reiterated states' responsibilities to ensure compliance with applicable instruments on nuclear safety and security, such as the Convention on Nuclear Safety, the Joint Convention on the Safety of Spent Fuel, and the Convention on the Physical Protection of Nuclear Material and its amendment. We agreed it was high time the IAEA deployed an expert mission to the ZNPP without delay. Yet, the situation remains unchanged. Shelling around the ZNPP continues, and we meet once again. Our inability to translate words into actions is pushing us to the brink of reason. 2 weeks ago, the IAEA assessed that the situation posed no immediate threat to nuclear safety. But as the situation drags on, the threat that was once limited becomes an increasingly concrete risk. We renew our call to all parties to refrain from any measure that could jeopardize the safety and security of the ZNPP, as well as its safe operation. Brazil recognizes the indispensable role that the International Atomic Energy Agency can play in taking the necessary steps to help ensure nuclear safety and security and prevent any radiological consequences for the population and the environment in the region and beyond. We therefore welcome news that negotiations for deployment of an IAEA expert mission to Zaporizhzhia are progressing, and we urge the parties to allow its immediate dispatch. And I thank you.
I thank the representative of Brazil, and I give the floor to the representative of Albania.
Thank you, Mr. President. We thank USG DiCarlo for her information.
Colleagues, we had a meeting on this very issue less than 2 weeks ago. Our position has not changed, and although we are fully aware of the importance of the matter, there is one simple issue that stands on top of everything. We are here only because of this senseless, unjustified, unprovoked, and illegal war. Everything we have been discussing here on Ukraine during this long 6 months comes from the unjustified actions of Russia, from its war of choice, and now also the continued danger of a nuclear catastrophe. Mr. President, Albania condemns the militarization of nuclear power plant in Ukraine. We condemn any action of violence inside or near the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant or against its personnel. Ukrainian personnel operating the plant under the Russian invasion must be able to carry out their important tasks without restriction, threats, or pressure. Albania reiterates its full and continued support for the IAEA and its staff to access immediately, safely, and without any impediment all nuclear facilities in Ukraine, and engage directly with the responsible Ukrainian staff at the facilities. We support the expert mission to the scene as soon as possible to help stabilize the nuclear safety and security situation at the Zaporizhzhia NPP to conduct safety, security, and safeguards protocols. Mr. President, we remain very worried by the reports that the very reason of the presence of the Russian military personnel at the Ukrainian nuclear plant is to disconnect the power plant from the Ukrainian energy network and divert its energy for Russian interests. We welcome the clear position of SG Guterres on the matter and reiterate our position. Zaporizhzhia power plant is Ukrainian. Its electricity is Ukrainian. Russia and its troops have no place there, no part in it. In conclusion, we reiterate our full solidarity with Ukraine and its people and call again on the Russian Federation to put an end to this war and immediately withdraw all its armed forces from Ukraine, including from Ukrainian nuclear facilities, if they are truly interested in preventing incidents with catastrophic consequences for all of us. There is no reason for Russian troops to be in Ukraine. There is no need for Russian troops to be in a nuclear power plant. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Albania for her statement. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as the representative of China. I thank USG DiCarlo for her briefing. When the Council last considered the issue of safety of Ukraine's nuclear facilities, members expressed concern about the safety of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. It is disconcerting that the nuclear power plant is still under shelling in recent days. While the shelling has not yet posed an immediate threat to the safety of the nuclear power plant, as IAEA Director General Grossi stated, this could change at any moment. There is no room for trial and error when it comes to the safety and security of nuclear facilities. Any single incident could lead to a serious nuclear accident, with irreversible consequences for the ecosystem and public health of Ukraine and the neighboring countries. China once again calls on the parties concerned to exercise maximum restraint, strictly abide by the provisions of relevant international law, earnestly implement the 7 pillars proposed by Director General Grossi, avoid actions that might endanger nuclear safety and security, and minimize the risk of accidents. China has always supported the IAEA in fulfilling its safeguards responsibilities in strict accordance with its mandate and playing an active role in promoting nuclear safety and security. Under the current circumstances, it is necessary for the IAEA to conduct a site visit to the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant as soon as possible to make a professional and technical assessment of the safety and security situation of the nuclear facilities. We have taken note that both Russia and Ukraine have made positive statements about the visit. We hope that all parties concerned will clear political obstacles, strengthen communication and collaboration, adhere to the issue-oriented approach, and reach agreement on the timing and details of the visit as soon as possible, so that the IAEA mission can be carried out in a timely manner. Colleagues, the safety and security of nuclear facilities bears on the common welfare of mankind. To deal with the issue, we must adhere to science and rationality, adhere to the spirit of humanity, adhere to communication and cooperation, and go beyond political positions, go beyond hostile differences, and go beyond military considerations. We must not allow the tragedies of Chernobyl and the Fukushima nuclear accidents to be repeated. To fundamentally eliminate the nuclear safety risks of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, the international community must promote the de-escalation of the situation in a responsible manner, work on diplomatic efforts and political solutions, guide the parties back to dialogue and negotiations, and achieve a ceasefire and cessation of hostilities at an early date. China once again calls upon all parties concerned to pay attention to each other's legitimate security concerns, build a balanced, effective, and sustainable security architecture, and make unremitting efforts towards the proper resolution of the Ukraine crisis and achieving lasting peace and stability in the region. I resume my function as President of the Council. I've taken note that the representative of the Russian Federation has requested the floor to make additional remarks. Now I give the floor to the Russian Federation.
Thank you, Mr. President. We gathered here today because reasons that compelled us to request this meeting have not disappeared. The shellings of the NPP and Energodar by the Ukrainian armed forces continue, despite the fact that the NPP does not have Russian heavy artillery, nor is there a fire being conducted from there. We have said this many times, and this can be confirmed by the objective control data, including from satellite. But today, once again, we've heard the old record saying that Russia is the guilty party, guilty for everything. What undergirds the developments surrounding by the NPP is being distorted, and obvious facts are being passed over in silence or denied. And all of this is done with one goal in mind: to make sure that the Kiev proteges are whitewashed, regardless what it is that they do. They get carte blanche for any reckless activities, knowing that they will be whitewashed by their patrons. Once again, we are called upon to agree to the IAEA visit, something to which agreed in June already and reconfirmed that many times, including today. Some Western colleagues are of the view that there is only one and the most simple way out of the situation, namely withdraw Russian forces from there and create a demilitarized area surrounding the Zaporizhzhia NPP. This is an irresponsible statement. It does not take into account at all the need to have conditions for the safe functioning of the Zaporizhzhia NPP. Once again, we appeal to you to stop covering up what your Kiev proteges are doing and compel them to stop them attacking the Zaporizhzhia NPP, which is fraught with the risk of accident and radioactive contamination of European countries. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation. I shall now give the floor to the representative of Ukraine.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. Distinguished members of the Security Council, I would like to thank Under-Secretary General Di Carlo for her informative briefing. I wish we had been gathered here by Russia to hear the only thing that the entire world wants to hear, and that is a statement that Russia demilitarizes Zaporizhzhia NPP, withdraws its troops, and hands it over to the government of Ukraine. Instead, we wasted more than 1 hour to listen to a slew of fictitious sound bites. The terrorist state does not stop playing around with the international community. Once again, it has the audacity to convene a UN Security Council meeting to discuss its own provocations, its own terror at the ZNPP. Let me reiterate, the current situation makes it clear that all that will ultimately remove the nuclear threats stemming from the illegal Russian presence at the nuclear power plant is the withdrawal of the Russian weapons and troops and the return of the station to the legitimate control by Ukraine. Ukraine greatly appreciates the efforts of the IAEA and the UN to ensure the safety and security of all Ukrainian nuclear facilities against the backdrop of the Russian invasion. We have always underlined the importance of the full and consistent implementation by the agency of its mandate. In this regard, since the beginning of Russia's occupation of ZNPP, Ukraine has insisted on the need to send a mission to the site and has negotiated its modalities with the IAEA. We welcome the readiness of the IAEA Director General to send the mission to the occupied ZNPP, and the visit should be conducted in strict compliance with the national legislation of Ukraine and with full respect of its international obligations. Earlier today, Ukraine's Foreign Minister Kuleba has responded to the Director General's letter dated August 17th regarding the above mission. As follows from the letter, the IAEA proposal for the itinerary is in compliance with the national legislation of Ukraine and in general might be accepted. Further arrangements are to be made based on the security conditions and require communication of detailed route plans and other logistical aspects as soon as possible. We continue to believe that the mission's effectiveness can be bolstered by incorporating military and political components backed by UN expertise. Considering the scale of the current challenges and threats, we also urge the IAEA to consider a permanent presence of its experts at the ZNPP until the competent Ukrainian authorities regain full control over this nuclear facility. Russian demonstration of the wish to organize the mission to the ZNPP has only one purpose. Let's proceed from the basics. ZNPP is a Ukrainian facility located on Ukrainian territory. The occupiers have trained some of the hostages in what they should say and what they shouldn't show to the IAEA. That is why it is really important to conduct the mission in a way that would allow the international community to see the real situation and not a Russian theatrical show. It is imperative that the mission takes place, A, at the request of Ukraine, B, at the Ukrainian nuclear facility, C, is covered by the agreement on the application of safeguards between Ukraine and the IAEA. Russia's role is to ensure the physical security of the mission. Russia is turning the issue of nuclear safety at the facility into a farce, a circus. It downplays the significance of the threats it has created and diverts attention from the urgent issue of demilitarization and deoccupation of the station. The entire international community has been demanding this for almost 6 months. This is what the IAEA says. Russia pretends not to hear this and continues to invent newer and newer ways of using the peaceful station for military purposes. It is obvious that any mission, be it the IAEA or the UN, while at the station, will record flagrant violations of norms and requirements for nuclear safety. Therefore, Russia is trying to avoid responsibility, but it will not succeed. Russia needs the ZNPP as a means of waging war. But there is another aspect. Russia is trying at any cost to cover the needs of the temporarily occupied Crimea and other TOT, perhaps Zaporizhzhia, Kherson regions. In electricity, because the publicized illegal electric bridge has never covered these needs and will not cover them. Moreover, Russia needs the ZNPP for propaganda purposes, because the deoccupation of the plant will mean a failure of Putin's campaign in the south of Ukraine. Now about shelling. Russian narratives about Ukrainian shelling of the station do not stand up to scrutiny. Nobody who is at least conscious can imagine that Ukraine would target a nuclear power plant at tremendous risk of nuclear catastrophe on its own territory. Such a catastrophe would lead to numerous deaths and pollution for many years to come. We have already lost thousands of human lives and thousands of square kilometers of our territory of the exclusion zone around Chernobyl after 1986. We are mourning thousands of lives of Ukrainians killed by Russians in their war against Ukraine. We suffer from genocide conducted by Russians on the occupied territories. There, they kidnap thousands of children left orphaned after their parents are killed by the Russian army. We will never forget it, and we will do everything to save each Ukrainian life. What we can do here in the UN format is to name things as they are. Russians forget that we live in a century of modern technologies. As their crimes in Bucha and Mariupol were clearly seen from satellite, the shelling under the false flag will be clearly filmed again. Dear colleagues, turning back to the international mission to the ZNPP, let me stress that the need to send such a mission to the ZNPP is primarily due to violations of all 7 pillars of nuclear and nuclear security that arose as a result of the illegal presence there of the Russian army and Rosatom. The constant presence of the IAEA and other experts at the station could become a determining factor in the context of its demilitarization and deoccupation. The international community, in its turn, must continue to apply political pressure on the aggressor state of Russia and demand full demilitarization and unconditional deoccupation. Let me stress that nuclear security and safety is an absolute priority for everyone in the world, and Russia must immediately and without any conditions withdraw its troops. Stop all provocations, all shelling. It is unacceptable that Russia is deliberately putting all of us on the brink of a global nuclear disaster. As soon as Russia withdraws its troops from the facility, on which they simply have no right to be, the threat of a nuclear disaster will disappear. Just a similar threat disappeared as soon as Russian troops withdrew from the Chernobyl nuclear power plant and the exclusion zone. And this threat will no longer exist, just as it does not exist at 3 other Ukrainian nuclear power plants: Khmelnytsky NPP, Rivne NPP, and South Ukraine NPP. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Ukraine for his statement. If there are no council members inscribed on the list of my speaker, I announce the meeting is adjourned.